One of my favorite guys, and I mean, if you want to listen to a guy do play-by-play, you could put this on a shelf and put it on your TV, on your radio, whatever, and there's no finer play-by-play announcer over the last 30 years in multiple sports than Wayne Larrivee, who now, after being associated, if you will, in Chicago sports for a long time, the Bulls and the Cubs and the Bears, he's a Packer guy now for a long time. Wayne Larrivee, how are you, my man? You never age a day.
That's not true, and you know it. And by the way, I never looked good young, so what am I going to do now?
Oh, you've
Hey,
always
by the way,
looked
who were you
great.
talking about when you were leading into me? I don't reflect that individual.
Yes, you do, Wayne. Yes, you do. I mean, to listen to you do games, and that's coming from a guy who did play-by-play to another. I mean, your calls are just off the charts every single event you do, whether it was Big Ten Network, going way back to your early start in Texas, I think it was. You were down there, then get the Kansas City Chiefs job, and then on to Chicago from there where you did it all, and now with the Packers. Wayne, look, it just seems like, and for you, it's got to be a lot worse than it is for us here in Cincinnati because we don't follow it all the time, but we find ourselves talking about it all the time. Where does this whole Aaron Rodgers thing, where is it? Where is it going? Does anybody know?
I don't know if anybody knows for sure, Tommy, but it's got to be heading to a deal with the New York Jets. You just think my one theory that was advanced to me, and that it kind of makes sense, is that we may not know anything until draft night because the two teams probably have a deal already done, but it's contingent on how the first round of the draft unfolds. And I'm talking about maybe the first 10 to 12 picks, because the Packers would like to move up to that number 13 pick and, flip picks with the Jets, go from 15 to 13. The Jets fall back to number 15. Now, what I think is contingent upon that is the right offensive lineman or lineman still being available, because that's what the Jets need with their number one pick. They need an offensive tackle. And if one of those guys starts slipping, which certainly could happen, then maybe the Jets are comfortable saying, hey, we can get our guy at number 15. So we'll flip picks with the Packers, and maybe we throw a third or a second round in there. Maybe there's no conditional pick the following year, and we get this Rodgers deal done right away. So it's kind of complex because of the Rodgers contract, but I do think the Packers would like to flip picks. They'd like to get a second round pick in this draft and see where it goes from there.
It seems, though, Wayne, and that there are just so many, twists and turns to this whole thing. I mean, even just recently, where all of a sudden, I know that Woody Johnson, the owner of the Jets, has all of a sudden let people know we're not giving up a first-round pick because, Rodgers then starts to kind of hint about retirement again. It just seems like he's playing chess with a couple of different organizations and a whole lot of people here in this operation. Is that fair to say, or is that unfair to say?
Well, it depends on who's playing chess. I mean, I think Aaron's kind of sitting there. Woody Johnson is the guy. Now, again, Tom, we're in the lying season in the NFL. This is when it's legal to lie to everybody if you're an NFL team or an NFL person. So we're in the lying season. Now, the latest, this came out last week, the Woody Johnson is kind of pushing back on what the Jets were offering to get this deal done. And it's incumbent upon them to get this deal done and get Rodgers into camp and get him into the offseason program, because he's got he's all new people to work with for the most part. Now, Woody Johnson apparently has cold feet. Woody Johnson is the guy who basically is the guy who got behind this thing and generated this whole deal in the first place. It didn't come from the general manager, didn't come from the head coach, but Woody Johnson is the guy who and he led the brigade of people, went out to California to visit in person with Rodgers, that type of thing. So I find it hard to believe that Woody Johnson is pushing back on this deal. Do they want to give up a number one draft choice? Not this year. Would they give up a conditional number one draft choice next year? That might be what the Packers are holding out for.
All right, let's talk about the team and assume for a second. Well, before I do that, Do you envision any scenario? Because right now he's still under contract with the Green Bay Packers. But do you envision any scenario that could have something positive about it, or just any scenario in general where where Rodgers is back with the Packers this year?
Wow. Well, Mark Murphy said it himself. He's the president, CEO and president of the team. He said, hey, listen, if we don't get what we want, I mean, it's possible Rodgers could come back. But, part of part of how we got here, Thom, is that, if you bring back Aaron Rodgers, you're essentially running back what you had last year. Because with Rodgers comes basically Randall Cobb. You're keeping the veteran at tight end, Mercedes Lewis. You probably would have re-signed Alan Lazard, that kind of thing. The Packers don't want to run back last year. You don't run back 8-9. You run back 13-4. You try to run that back, but you don't run back 8-9. And that's part of where the Packers were. And if you go back to where this all began, after the season, I think the Packers were fine with Aaron Rodgers being their quarterback. They wanted him to be their quarterback, but they knew that they were going to have to restructure offensively, and that they weren't going to bring back Cobb and Lewis and Lazard. They weren't going to bring those guys back. And as Aaron looked at that, he says, well, then you're rebuilding. And he doesn't want any part at this stage of his career in a rebuild. So that's kind of how they got to where they're at. But right now, I don't see a scenario whereby Rodgers comes back into this camp with Jordan Love being basically announced as the starting quarterback.
I don't think anybody at this point in time can make any kind of definitive sort of declaration about what kind of quarterback Jordan Love will be or won't be. But clearly the Packers, this is a year they need to find out what this guy is capable or not capable of. What's kind of the vibe about him around the camp? He's never been the guy, obviously, with Rodgers still there. But what's the feeling about him as a player and a leader?
Tommy, you are so right. Number one, nobody knows what this guy is going to be like at quarterback. He has come in, and I'll tell you this. He's come in with all this noise around him for 3 years, all right? He has lockered 2 doors down from Aaron Rodgers, 1 locker between the 2 of them, okay? He has stood there every day. He's talked with the media when the media's wanted to talk with him. He has made progress. He came in, his first year was a typical redshirt year for a player. He came in with COVID. The training camp was reduced to about 3 or 4 weeks. Nobody had any chance. There were no games in the preseason that year. They had to get 2 quarterbacks ready for the regular season. He was not one of them. He did not dress for a single game his rookie year. His rookie year actually was the following season, and he started to make some progress. It was incremental progress. Didn't look good on the surface at first. Started a game at Kansas City, got the crap blitzed out of him in that game, struggled somewhat, but kept his poise and led the Packers to a late touchdown in Kansas City and made a game of it against the Chiefs, a game they eventually lost. Then last year, again, preseason games seemed to make some progress, but that's not the barometer you're looking for to judge a quarterback. Came in against Philadelphia in a mop-up role, basically, after Rodgers went out with an injury, played the 4th quarter, looked very sharp at Philadelphia. That's what everybody's banking on. So there's a lot of positive feel for Jordan Love because, Thom, he has worked at it. He knows the offense. He's done everything he can. Brian Gutekunst said, we don't need to see anything more. And what he meant by that was that it's not that he's confident this guy is going to be the next franchise quarterback. He's saying, we've seen all we need to see of this guy in preseason games, in practices, running the scout team for whatever that means, if on a mop-up role or filling in occasionally in a regular season game. We've seen all of that. What you don't know on a quarterback on this level in this game is once you hand the keys to that guy, he's got to drive off the lot, okay? And then you start finding out week after week, as defenses are scheming to stop him, then you start finding out, do you have a quarterback who can play in this league? Because you don't know until that happens. And it will take 6 to 8 weeks or more to figure that out.
But Wayne, you've forgotten more football than I know. But you and I both know, and you don't have to be some football savant to figure this out. Frequently, you're only as good, right, as those guys that are around you. And much has been made about, the receiving core or the lack thereof when Rodgers has been here since Adams walked out the door during last season. You mentioned they go 8-9. Although Rodgers did not look as sharp as he's looked in the past last year, I didn't think. He had some games where he did, but others he did not. But, do you think they'll get a fair evaluation of Love, knowing that they might be, as a franchise, if Love is a starter, that would tell you they are in rebuild mode, right? Okay, so this is what we're going to do and where we are moving forward. Are you going to be able to get a good feel for what he's capable of doing or not doing based on those that are around him?
That's a great point, Thom, and you're exactly right. Will he have enough around him initially? Let's go back to last year. It was the first time in my 24 going on 25 years in Green Bay, the Packers did not have a bona fide number one receiver. First time. Aaron Rodgers played with a couple of rookies out there. He played with Randall Cobb, who's still an effective slot receiver, but not the player he was 10 years ago, obviously, who is. And Alan Lazard. Alan Lazard is being paid like the Jets as a number two receiver. On a good receiving core, Alan Lazard is a 3. On a real good receiving core, he's a 4. You understand? He was the Packers' lead receiver last year. So you get an idea of the way it went. They never overcame the loss of Davante Adams, and Adams just didn't want to sign with the Packers. They offered him more money than the Raiders. He wanted to go to the Raiders. That's what he did. They worked out a deal. But they never overcame that, and where we saw evidence of that was especially in the red zone, where the Packers were dreadful. I believe they were 28th or 29th in the league in red zone touchdown production. So what do we have now? There's no Alan Lazard. There's no Robert Tonyan at tight end. The Packers have a couple of promising second-year players, actually 3 second-year wide receivers. They're going to have to get a veteran somewhere along the line, I think, into that receiver room. Maybe it's Randall Cobb if he doesn't sign with the Jets. I don't know. But somebody. And now they've got to get tight end. And they have to get a tight end early in this draft, maybe as early as their first pick in the first round. So that's where they're at with Jordan Love. He has a good offensive line behind him, and he has an excellent running game, 2 excellent running backs. The thing we're curious to see with Jordan, he has escapability. He has athletic ability. He has a big arm. All of those things that made him a first-round draft choice, he has all of that. And I think the mobility he brings to the position will open some eyes, because in recent years, Aaron Rodgers could still move. He could still evade the rush, but his athleticism, his ability to run wasn't quite as prominent. Jordan Love has more of that at this stage in his career. So we're anxious to see how that works out. But the receiving core, is it one of the top receiving cores in the league? In all honesty, probably not.
I'm kind of curious, because you've seen the game evolve over your 35-plus years broadcasting in the NFL. Heck, it might – are you up to 40 yet? I'm being serious about it. Have you done NFL games for now almost 40 years?
I think it's around 45, 46, somewhere in that area.
I sold you short. Unbelievable.
It started in 78.
Well, I want to ask you this, because – and maybe you won't have the answer. Maybe it's an unfair question. When you talk about the Rodgers thing, and he got his huge contract prior to last year, here in Cincinnati, everybody talking about Joe Burrow getting a huge deal. And it's interesting, because as you and I are sitting here chatting right now, the news just broke about Jalen Hurts becoming the highest paid player in NFL history today, getting $225 million on a 5-year deal from Philly. More on that later. What I'm getting at is, you mentioned the Packers tried to sign Adams. Okay, he had made the decision he wanted to go to the Raiders. That's where he ended up going. They had already paid Rodgers. Around here in Cincinnati, a lot of people are sitting here wondering, something's got to give, because you've got Burrow, whose deal is up. You got T. Higgins, who, though you've got some control over him, he's in line for a big money deal. Jamar Chase, a year behind him, a big money deal. Can you pay 3 guys The quarterback over 40 million, two receivers anywhere from 20 to 30 million over the long haul, and still have a good team around them?
Well, the Bengals, and by the way, their general manager Duke Tobin has done a great job. They're in salary cap. They're in a precarious salary cap position going forward for this reason. They've done such a good job at drafting that now it comes time to pay those players. And the Packers have been in that situation. They made David Bakhtiari the highest paid offensive lineman in the history of the game. Aaron Rodgers, highest paid quarterback, history of the game. Jair Alexander, highest paid cornerback, history of the game. And all these guys are highest paid. And Thom, at some point, that squeezes your salary cap. And, that's what I think is going to be happening in the next few years in Cincinnati. They've done a great job of putting talent together. Duke Tobin, by the way, when we were in Chicago, Bill Tobin, his dad, was the architect of the Bears and one of the people behind the 85 Bears and putting that team together, one of the greatest teams in the history of the game. So, to see Duke do this well is great. But, the salary cap and free agency kind of levels the playing field. The salary cap, and that you can't keep everybody. But where you get into trouble with the salary cap, where most teams get in trouble, is they indulge in free agency year after year, and then they have no more room to pay guys. Well, the flip side of that is the Pittsburghs and the Green Bays and now the Cincinnatis doing such a great job of drafting, and they want to keep these guys, but you can't keep everybody. So it's going to be perplexing to see what happens with that Cincinnati team that I thought got screwed out of that Super Bowl with that goal line call on the inside linebacker against the Rams. That was egregious.
Yeah. Well, they're hoping. It's been back-to-back AFC championship games around here and one Super Bowl, so we'll find out if they've got it. They certainly have some decisions to make. They're not on the clock quite yet, but they're knocking on that door. When you look, last question for you, Wayno, you know so much about the Bears. You know everybody in the division. We're going to be talking about the Lions a little bit later on. When you look at the division for next year, for this upcoming season, and Cousins is going to be still in Minnesota. How do you handicap that? Because it's a division that Green Bay has owned forever, and it doesn't look like they're going to own it for the immediate future. How do you see that division moving forward?
Well, it's interesting. Those of us watching it closely last year, by the end of the season, the best team in that division was Detroit.
Yeah.
I mean, they trounced Minnesota in the final month of the season. They trounced the Vikings. And then they came out and beat the Packers when all the Packers had to do was win the game at Lambeau Field on a Sunday night, and they're in the playoffs. And the Lions had nothing to play for and still won the game. So let's start there. The Lions are the best team in the division at the moment, based on where they finished last year. They didn't have the best record. Minnesota made the playoffs. Minnesota wasn't the best team in that division last year. Matter of fact, the Packers trounced Minnesota on New Year's Day in Green Bay. So I look at the Lions right now. They've got a good young base they're putting together. It looks to me like it's a sustainable base. A lot will depend on how well Jared Goff plays going forward, but he was outstanding last year. The Vikings under Kirk Cousins, it's interesting, Thom, because they're reloading. They're trying to rebuild that defense, and it looks like they're going to have to do a certain amount of rebuilding on offense, too. Dalvin Cook probably won't be back at running back. You've got the Packers in their situation. The big problem last year, the big disappointment last year wasn't so much the way the offense played, Thom. They expected that defense to be a solid top 10, maybe top 5 defense, and it was anything but. 17th in points allowed, 17th in yardage allowed, 28th in yards per rushing attempt. It wasn't good enough based on the struggles they had offensively. And then you've got Chicago. Good young team building. Made an interesting deal trading away the number 1 draft choice. Now they've got a number 1 this year, obviously, but the key to that deal was number 1 next year. Why? Well, because they aren't sure that their quarterback is the real deal, and they're going to take one more year to find out. And if he isn't, the quarterback class next year is much better than this year's, and the Bears will have 2 first-round draft choices to move up and down the board to get their quarterback next year if Justin Fields isn't the real deal based on what happens this coming season.
What do you think of Fields?
I think he's a great talent, Tom. I mean, his running ability is without question. He has all the tools you look for in today's quarterback. Dual threat quarterback, big arm, makes all the throws. Here's what we don't know about him, and here's what they don't know about him. Is he a guy who has the innate quick twitch mentally that separates the great quarterbacks from the good to average quarterbacks? Can he read the defense at the snap of the ball? And that's what they don't know about yet. And as my friend Hub Arkish said, boy, the fact they don't know that yet, he's been around now for a few years. The fact they don't know that yet is probably one of the reasons why they insisted on getting an extra first-round draft choice for next year.
Wayne Larrivee, it's been a pleasure, my friend. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us here on the program. And, man, we're always rooting for you and always listening for you.
Hey, Tommy, thank you so much. You know, some of the most fun I have ever had in broadcasting, I want to just tell the folks this for a minute, was when you and Santo and Stoney and I used to go out and play golf. We were doing Cubs baseball over those years, and we used to go out on the road on early in the morning before a night game, and the banter with Santo and Stoney and you, I've never laughed that hard in my life. You were a delight. You're a tremendous talent as a play-by-play guy, and a delight to be around, and really enjoyed it, Tom, and so glad we were able to connect, and let's keep in touch because, you know, you're just one of the special people in this business.
Well, Wayno, you're very kind to say so, my man. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch up sometime soon, I hope, buddy.
Please do. Thank you, Tom.
Wayne Larrivee, kind enough to join us. That guy knows his stuff right there.